Hello and welcome back to MindSpanse. I'm Craig and thank you for taking some time with me today. I am going to continue my discussion about public speaking. We had a great intro, and then in our last episode we talked about really the nuts and bolts of when you get that first call and making sure you get all the information and really understanding everything about what you're supposed to do and who your audience is and who the venue is and all that kind of stuff. And really thinking about your topic and working with sponsors and working with the event producers and really nailing all the very, very basic stuff, including travel and where you're going to stay and how you're going to get to the venue and all that kind of stuff. So today we're going to talk about the structure. This is within the context of preparation, practice, and presence, the 3 Ps of my presentation methodology that I use for the last 30 years. And so within preparation, we have the nuts and bolts, which we just covered. And today we're going to talk about the structure, which is a structure I generally always use. And then we'll talk about the content. So in terms of structure, it's really very, very simple. And what I try to do is create a structure that allows me to fall back if I get lost in my thoughts, because sometimes you just freak out. It does happen to the best of us. You just lose your train of thought. So I try to create an overall structure that makes it very, very easy for me. And I've helped other people do this over many presentations with CEOs on really being able to always fall back on a very, very simple structure and then fill in around it. So if you ever get a little lost, you always have this core structure to fall back on and then restart. So it's really very, very simple. The structure is an introduction. So my name is Craig Kaufman and thank you for joining me today. So that's really simple. If you can nail that, that's could be the hardest thing. It's the first word, so just make it as simple as absolutely possible. And then, why are you there? So I'm here. I'm going to use an example I talked about, which is a speech I had to give in China on the IT outsourcing world. So I'm really excited to be here in Guangzhou and talk to you about how the information technology outsourcers in China can do a better job at both penetrating US companies as well as growing their market share within the United States. So that's what we're here to talk about. And hopefully you've done your work to figure out that that's something that people care about in terms of all the relevant people. And it's something you're excited to share some information on. And then basically you want to give some street credibility. So give a little bit, very little bit background. So these are all quick. So hi, my name's Craig. I'm going to talk to you about Chinese outsourcing and how you can do a better job at penetrating the US market. I've been a technology investment banker for over 25 years, and I've worked with both small and large information technology outsourcers all over the world. And so I have a very good understanding of what the US companies are looking for, and as it relates to China specifically, I've done quite a bit of research preparing for this speech to understand what the challenges are or what the issues may be as it relates to US decision makers and where they like to do their outsourcing and why they may or may not choose China as a place to do that. So these are all really simple, right? So if you can get through that, from here, it's even easier. So you have your intro, you have what you're talking about, you have your street cred, and then you are only able to present 3 points because that's all people will ever remember. So the idea is to do them using very personal stories. So you develop your 3 points. Point 1 is maybe Chinese market share in the US is very, very low. And I'll tell you a story about that. I was talking to some CEOs. They were not very large companies. I mean, they're about $400 million in revenue, so reasonable and good targets for Chinese outsourcers. And the two things that stood out, there's been some challenges with regards to intellectual property issues, but more importantly is just language and feeling comfortable that there is the ability to communicate and structurally communicate, and that there's an infrastructure to facilitate that communication as it relates to these projects. So now I've delivered this message. I've done some research. Here's my first point. My first point is there are some challenges, and here's the market share that you have today. And here's that story about me talking to some of these CEOs and what their concerns are. And then you launch into the next point, is that most CEOs have not been to China, so they don't actually know what it's like here. You know, they have this vision of China 30 years ago. And then I'll tell a story, which I did actually in this presentation. I told a story is I had not been to China before I came here to give this presentation. And I built this whole presentation based on research I had done about China. And the reality is I got the incredible opportunity to spend 2 weeks before this speech traveling around China with some of the largest chief information officers of US large companies, banks, and airlines. And so I got all this extra information, plus I got to see China in all its glory, and how amazing a country is, and how vibrant and how much growth has been going on, and the rise of the middle and upper classes all over the country. And so it was just an incredibly enlightening journey. And I was actually going to change my presentation because it was so wrong. And this is exactly what I said in this speech. And by the way, this was a speech with like 20,000 people with 30-foot screens, so it was a bit intimidating. But so I was like, I was going to actually change my whole speech, but I said, you know, that would be mischaracterizing the audience that you're trying to go win, meaning the customers you're trying to win. And so I want to give you the speech from the perspective of someone who had never been to China, like many of the CEOs that I deal with, and have a particular perspective about China and have not spent time traveling around. So I gave that presentation just like that, and then weaved in those points. So one is people haven't been there, and they have these perceived issues with how Chinese deal with either intellectual property or language or structure of project management. Number two, the just conception of China, because they haven't spent the time, and so they have this sort of preconceived notion of what China is, which is wrong. And then the third point is that they've chosen India and Eastern Europe because they perceive them as easier countries to work in. Whether it's language, they feel very comfortable that people speak English reasonably well, and there's an infrastructure for managing IT projects, and they just don't have that same sense. And so in order to bridge the gap, you need to have two things. One, you need to have more people in the US communicating in English with customers. And two, you need to bring people over. You need to do these kinds of trips for the decision makers. And that's your investment in terms of winning that business. And make sure that you address these issues as it relates to potentially intellectual property and managing the security of the information flow, as well as the language, managing the communications, and driving through some smaller projects to prove that you can perform really well. And so this was the speech. So there's just 3 points, and I had a story behind each point. And this is the structure of every speech I give, which is I introduce myself, I say what I'm going to talk about, and I tell a little bit, very little bit, to give some credibility to what I'm talking about. Then I hit 3 points. I tell 3 stories that are very personable, and then I wrap up and I say thank you very much. As I said, these are my 3 points, that it's not that people don't want to do business in China. You need to attack several things. One is the perception, and one way to do that is to bring people over. 2 is the language, perception of language challenges, and 3 is the perception of intellectual property security. And if you address all those things, then there's a higher likelihood that you'll start to penetrate that business. And because people have had challenges in India, as you know, I mean, people have had challenges all over the world with relating to IT project outsourcing. And so if you can meet the threshold of expectations and mitigate the challenges, you're going to get your fair share of business. So with that, I want to thank you very much. And so that's it. You wrap up, say, have a great day. I really appreciate your time. You can reach me at the email address, or you can talk to the event sponsors, and they'll send you my contact information. Happy to talk to you further and answer any specific questions. And then if you have time, depending on what they're doing at the event, you do some Q&A and keep it very simple. Like if they ask a question, just answer the question, and then smile and walk off the stage. And so it's really that simple. So when you keep that framework in mind, say I'm only going to have 3 points. I'm going to tell 3 stories to support that points. I'm going to throw in some data to support some of the things I'm talking about, and or interviews that I've done, even if it's anecdotal, and then I'm going to wrap up and call it a day. And so that same structure can be used in a 15-minute speech, or it can be used in a 40-minute speech. If you have to speak longer for whatever reason, just because of the nature of the event, certainly still stay to 3 points. You just may add another story that reinforces the point, or say something personal about your journey to get to the event, that reminded you of something that was relevant to this whole situation. For me, it was, I happened to be with 2 of the biggest airline CIOs, Chief Information Officers, and they were telling me about their outsourcing projects, and the fact that the U.S. air traffic control system was 50 years old, and how they really couldn't redo it. It was actually quite scary. So it was sort of a funny little story about that, and how I was thinking about that as we were flying to China, and I was sort of frightened, but they seemed to be okay, so that made me feel better. But certainly, putting together these outsourcing projects outside of the U.S. was something that they were interested in, because it would necessarily influence the existing infrastructure today, which was critical to keep up and running so that planes don't all smash into each other. So that's what I got for you today. So we did nuts and bolts in episode 2. Here we're doing the structure, which you can use, intro, what you're talking about, street cred, 3 bullet points with 3 stories, wrap up, and say goodbye, and tell people where they can reach you. And so with that, I wish everyone a phenomenal day. Don't be afraid. Say yes. When someone says, do you want to give a speech? Say yes, and then watch my videos. And there are also lots of other videos out there. But there's no reason to be afraid. Just stick with a really tight structure, and you'll always give a B plus presentation. And if you get your energy up, pump it up, then it's going to be an A plus. And so the next thing we're going to talk about in the next episode is content. What kind of content do we use? And we'll talk about slides, and we'll talk about video, and we'll talk about the actual types of stories and how do you weave them in and where should you put them and that kind of stuff. So I think you'll find that really, really useful as it relates to preparing your research and how you're going to choose your 3 points, right? Because that's the most important thing, is you want people to walk away with 3 things that are really valuable to them and that they can go and go do more research or reach out to you for more information or to their network and to help them to solve their problems and build their businesses. So with that, like the video, subscribe to the channel please, and share it with your friends. I'm Craig, and I wish everyone a phenomenal, phenomenal day, and look forward to episode 4 on content. Thank you very much.